So that's nice. I can record to the computer rather than the cloud now, for now. All right, so let's look at this. Find my notes. I definitely know the first four. Okay, there we go. All right, number one, the nature of attention. And I kind of typed this out so that as the viewer, you kind of have to go through this again, because I think that repetition is an excellent way to process things into memory. So we have the nature of attention, and then we have tricks of attention. These are the topics of basic alignment that we have gone over. And a lot of it is actually just, let me put the microphone by my mouth. A lot of it is the core theory of the methodology as well. Golden mean principle. Number 4, the act of allowing. And then I kind of break it up because then we go into some of the actual practices. That was the core theory that I call the 4 corners. I did indeed make that up, but that's what happens when you create a practice. You make stuff up. 4 modes. And then I have number 7 as deliberate driving. And I also put in the beverage, because I didn't think that the deliberate beverage really required its own category or its own class. And then, so a little bit of a break again, and then we go into checking in. And so that, of course, is all throughout the day. We're checking into the present moment. And, you know, we do have particular ways of doing that. Productive self-talk. Hey, Ida, thanks for hanging out. Number 10, the golden line. And I put intro because I really do build on the golden line. So I'll just keep it simple and say that. And then last week, we talked all week about setting up our practice. If you do one-on-ones with me, that's going to be a super heavy topic. Maybe not in the beginning. It just depends on who the person is, I suppose. But definitely something that we're going to talk a lot about in one-on-one sessions, if they're continuous, is how to set up your one-on-one practice. And then we have the topic for today. But before we get into that, Jerry, how the hell are you? What's new with you today?
I'm just getting up and enjoying my deliberate beverage. It's beautiful out.
Me too. Yeah, it is really nice. I have the window open. Supposed to have some thunderstorms and whatnot today, and the strangest thing ever, I could not find yesterday's video. So it has just poofed into the ether. I don't know. It will find me or it won't. All right, so before we move along, does anybody have a question about any of the first, I guess that is 11 topics? So these are the topics that I think would be, I kind of just put myself into the beginner's mind, my own beginner's mind, because that's really all I could do. And then of course I take suggestions and recommendations from other people, and that also influences like the order that I put things in. So I'm definitely taking everything everybody says to me in consideration. But obviously, just for example, one of the very first things that we would need to talk about in a mindfulness practice such as this is the nature of attention. And of course, that's the very first topic in basic alignment, is the nature of attention. And then what are we doing with it in this practice? We create tricks of attention. And that pretty much is, I mean, if we boil it down, that's really all we're doing. So, and that's great, but yeah, pretty simple. So guys, do you have any questions? Karen, welcome. Thanks for hanging out. And we got Lauren, Ida, Jerry, Shayna. Do you guys have any questions about the first topics? I'll put them back on the whiteboard, mute myself, take a drink of coffee, and then are there any questions so far? Oh, I see a chat. Hold on one second. Where's chat? There it is. Okay. Okay, cool. Good morning, Karen. I have to kind of look over the phone to see the chat, so that's what I'm doing. But I'll go back to the whiteboard. So if you were brand new to this practice, I really feel like I would want to talk about all of these topics first. And then topic 5, 6, and 7 is because I really want to give you something you can do right away also. Right, Jerry? I don't want to just talk your ear off for the first 30 days. I mean, we got to start doing something right away. And so I think fox walking, 4 modes, and deliberate driving is a great way to get started. Not really embodiment yet. We're not really interacting with the thoughts too much. So I think that is a good entry point for most anybody. And you know what? You could learn all 13 of these topics and then just stop and never return to the T practice. And I still think that people will wildly benefit from these first 13 topics if they really understand them. And by understand, I mean they have the information and they have some experience to put them together, and then they're seeing in their experience where it applies. Then I think it could really benefit folks. So even these first 13 topics outside of an embodiment practice where we're redirecting the thinking back to the present moment, I still think that these first 13 topics are wildly beneficial. All right. Good morning, Karen. So, hey, do you guys have any questions? Or does this all, would you mind pulling your mic away from your mouth a bit just to see if it helps? Yeah, sure. Gravelly. How about that? Also, I can take a drink better.
Keep talking.
Okay. Once upon a time, there was a chipmunk named Chipper. He was the chipperiest chipmunk ever, and he was known all throughout the forest for being the chipperiest chipmunk ever. And I am making this up as I go along, Jerry. So is that enough? Or
Obviously.
Is that
it seems a little bit better, not quite as grovelly like my voice.
gravelly? You know what? I could also take it up a bit so that the microphone's just not so close to my mouth. Does that help?
Oh yeah, that's much better. I mean, whatever. I just thought try it a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, because if what you're hearing is showing up in the recording, you know, I would prefer it just looks stupid, but we're gonna go with it. If you're okay with it, I'm okay with it. Sounds much better. It's loud enough. Okay, cool. It just looks ridiculous with it up like that. Hold on. I mean, I don't really care, but I guess there's nothing I can do about that. I guess that's a little bit better. Oh, down, maybe? No, because then that just puts it right in front of my mouth again. Yeah, Karen, it looks like my antenna. Beep, 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 beep. That's all right. Hey, who'd we lose? All right, so I would love to answer any questions about these topics, but Jerry, anybody, do we have any questions about any of these topics so far? Setting up your practice is definitely going to be one of the most important ones that I think in the group study we're going to continue to talk about over and over and over again, because it's a daily practice that we will be embodying. And I say we loosely, you know, I don't want to put you in a box, but I know that I will be embodying this practice for the rest of my life. So setting up my practice will always be something that is valid to me, if that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, I think we spent so far, we've talked about one topic each week, and we're finally in week 12, about to enter week 13. And yeah, any questions about any of that? So do you guys mind if I start like just asking questions and quizzing? Jerry, can I quiz you? Because there's no questions. Dang it, now I have to think of a quiz question. Okay, so setting up our practice, I guess that's what we talked about last week. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have any quiz questions.
I would like to know
Yes.
how to, well, I know how to, but maybe any other tricks for different parts of the day, you know, afternoon and evening, where my
Well,
practice would start to fade away a bit. I'm not remembering as much as I do, from right through the morning up until lunchtime, early afternoon. I'm still remembering, but it's more spaced out in the evenings.
Yeah. Well, so,
Maybe
Ida, if we,
that's for another day. Maybe
no, not
it's
necessarily.
segmenting. Maybe is it, as Donna would
It
call it?
is. Well, segmenting is, I think, what Donna has created, and I love it because it makes sense. And I had never called it that, but it does make sense. So I immediately recognized what she was talking about. When we have areas of our day where everything is kind of all right, so we think that we don't need our practice. There's so many times where I was doing one-on-ones with somebody, or they were coming to class and they were telling me about their vacation that they had coming up, and then they would tell me about the vacation and how it went when they came back and how they would coast, and then eventually the vacation quality would start to go away. It would start to dissipate. So that really made sense then when Donna came up with the segmenting to help prevent the coasting. So that's kind of what that is. But so first of all, I would say that if we were really going to get into your day, Ida, then I think that would be kind of appropriate for a one-on-one setting, sort of. But in general, and I can kind of give examples of what I do, but in general, everybody is a little bit different. So how we approach the totality of our day is going to be different. Do you see what I mean? So maybe Jerry, she stays up really late, so her day is just going to begin and at a different time than me, at a different, it's going to feel totally different. So maybe she wakes up and just feels fantastic, whereas Karen wakes up and she feels groggy. So the way that each person approaches their day, I think should be different to some degree. I mean, there's going to be similarities, sure, but so for example, I intermittent fast until noon. So I know that it is somewhat of a battleground for me when I start to get hungry, or at least it used to be. Now I can feel hunger and appreciate it, and it's not a big deal. And I know that I'm supposed to be hungry. That's what the practice is doing of intermittent fasting. So I've done it so long now, I'm not surprised by it. But there was a time where I had to look at that, and I'm like, okay, this is an area where I obviously have more resistance to the present moment. I'm resisting the present moment more, and I'm going back into my habits. And it's because I'm not connecting that I'm going back into my habits, and then I just end up acting out the same behaviors. I give myself permission to cherry pick, or I just go back to habit unconsciously. So those are the two options. So it's going to be different for everybody, I think. But towards the evening, for me, I'm done. So after a certain point, I'm not going to do anything that I would consider creative unless it just comes to me. I'm not going to do a whole lot of work or anything like that. So that's the time where I would have this mantra that I'm not making any decisions after 5. I'm not going to think about these things after 5, because after 5 p.m., my mind is kind of mushy and I want to be kind to myself. I want to go easy on myself. It's just a part of my biology that I wake up at 3 a.m. So it's no wonder by 5 p.m., I've used a lot of energy today. These are just basic energy transference principles. So how we each approach our day. So let's say, for example, Ida, I use Jerry, maybe she stays up a little later at 5 p.m. Shit's just getting started, so 5 p.m. for her is going to be completely different than 5 p.m. for me, even if we're in the same time zone. Does that make sense? So really what I would recommend is looking at how you feel. What's occurring? Is it coasting? Is that a time where you start to coast? Where, obviously you're forgetting. You're mentioning that you're forgetting your tricks of attention. I don't know why that is. We would have to talk more about your particular situation. Is it because that's when you're cooking dinner, or is that the battleground of when you would previously be the most unconscious? It's really hard for me to tell. Or are you expecting the same mental energy that you woke up with at 8 p.m.? I don't know. Is that an expectation that you're
Yeah,
entertaining?
probably that, because I feel if I've had a really good day up to that point, remembering, being very connected, very aware all day, and then there's some kind of trick in my brain says now you can relax. You know, you don't have to do that the rest of the night because you're not really doing much. You know,
Okay.
I'm watching a program on TV. After dinner's over, I'm just sitting down and relaxing, and I'm enjoying sitting down and relaxing if it's been a busy
Okay.
day. So,
Yeah, so that makes sense to me, Ida. So I do have a recommendation for that. So that is what Donna's talking about with coasting. So you're going into a segment of your day and you're giving yourself permission to relinquish yourself from your practice. What I would recommend in situations like that is to be a little bit more peripheral with your practice. Remember, we talked about the degrees of attention. So degrees of attention are the strength and the magnitude of your attention into the present moment versus cognition. Does that make sense, Ida and Jerry and everyone before I go forward with the recommendation? Does that
yeah,
make sense, Ida? Can you say it back to me? I just want to make sure.
yes, that makes sense. Yeah.
Oh, no, not that. Can you,
What did you want me to say back to you? Sorry.
the point, the meaning of what I just,
Yes, that you could. Well, I've said that I've relaxed a wee bit, but you're saying that you can go more periphery. Periphery. I can't say that word, but
mm,
you know that word, and um, do probably what you're suggesting is do different tricks that suit your situation at that time. That
always that, yes.
yeah,
Always what you just said, yes. Yeah, so Ida, for that situation, of course, but what you just said is for all situations. All your tricks of attention should be adaptable to your situation. That's why I recommend having a note card with the toolbox so that you don't have to try to rely on just one thing. And then if that one thing isn't there, you're like, ah, screw it. So now we're talking about segmenting, and segmenting are opportunities for coasting, right? Jerry, what do you mean I mentioned cognition? Could you?
I was doing my practice and half listening, and I heard you say something about cognition, and then you said, Ida, would you say that back to me? And you said something about
Okay.
I
Yeah.
would
So,
recommend cognition or something.
yeah. All right. So here's the point that I was getting to is that attention can be to degrees. Now, what do I mean by that? That's kind of like that. That's what I would like to have back.
well,
What
you
do?
mean
Mhm,
that you don't have to do like all the practices that I would do in the morning, like breathing and all the physical things that I would do, but you can use a different trick at that time in the evening while still enjoying a television program or conversation with your husband or whatever it is that you're doing
mhm.
in the evening. You can do it 2 degrees. You split your attention really more at that time.
Yeah. So practice. Okay. Jerry said something. I got to write it down in relation to what Ida said. So I'll come back to that. But yes. So Ida, I think the way that you explained it is a representation of the degrees of attention. But I'm going to use an erroneous scale: 100% and 0%. That's erroneous because you never had 0% attention, and attention isn't really like this. But I'm just using this as for an example so that we can talk about it. Now, let's say 100% attention means laser like fucking focus. Like you are disarming a nuclear bomb where if you touch another wire, like the what's that game, Operation? Let's say that, Jerry, you have an operation board in front of you, and if you touch the sides, you don't just lose the game, an atomic bomb detonates. So what kind of focus do you think you're going to need? Do you think you're going to need 100% focus on the bomb, or 0%, or to what degree do you think you're going to need your attention on that fucking bomb? Laser like focus, right? Maybe a little peripheral focus so you can relax. Otherwise, you might get super, super anxious. So depends on how good at this practice you are. But now let's say that you want to enjoy listening to okay, I found out how to link these two. So let's say that you want to really pay attention to Ernest while he's talking in the class setting while simultaneously doing your practice? Are you going to use 100% focus on the world around you? Or are you going to kind of take that back a little bit? Aperture is just a little bit different, Lauren, but yeah, I'll talk about both of those then. So we can talk about the aperture of attention and degrees of attention. Excellent. This is great. So Jerry, I'll let you answer this one. So let's say that you're in a classroom setting and you really want to listen to what's being talked about, but you also want to do your practice simultaneously. Do you put 98% attention on the world around you? And I mean, not obviously not me, but like the birds and the sunlight and the world around me and all of these different things, like maybe my feet and my dantian, and I have all of these degrees of attention. What kind of attention, Jerry, do you think is most appropriate in terms of degrees from 0% to 100% while somebody is talking to you?
Well, in that moment, I'm just getting up and tired.
Yeah.
I felt my mind wandering into the day and started thinking. And so I took myself away to words.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading, actually, because that quiets things down a little bit as I was listening. And I do this a lot. I can do both. But in that moment, I was hearing half.
Hold on. Oh, I love that, Jerry. Okay. I'm sorry. I had to write that down.
I wasn't, maybe typically if I'm more awake, but in that moment, the reading that was quieting things as I listened, it started to go a little bit farther than I wanted. And then, I just missed a few words, and I heard you say, before I give a recommendation to E.T.A, you said something about referencing cognition, and you would, and that's when I kind of veered off. And you said something to me. So
yeah, no, I didn't actually mean that personally. I just mean like in general. I mean, obviously, I'm asking you the question based on that interaction or that exchange, but I just actually just mean this in general. Like when somebody is talking to you, to help elucidate to the point of the degrees of attention. So, and well, hold on a second, I'll get back to that. But so if somebody's talking to you, or if you want to pay attention to the television, for example, E.T.A, right? So in the evening, we want to watch television with the family and kind of just chill. That's watch our program time. And, we both love it. And if you're doing it because you want to, great. If you're doing it because you think you have to, there may be some cognitive, going on. But I'm not the judge unless you start asking me questions. So what I'm talking about is the degree of attention. So if somebody is talking, to what degree do I place my attention on the world around me, and then to what degree do I place my attention on them? So what I'm showing is that the degree of attention can change in terms of your practice and what you're doing or what you're thinking about. So let's say that you are thinking about something, you do have some thoughts going in through your mind, and you view them as productive, you view them as interesting, you view them as helpful. Now, I wouldn't say necessarily that you want 100% of your attention back on the present moment, because you have these thoughts that you want to entertain for whatever reason. And I don't want to judge unless you ask me to. I'm not going to think thoughts about what thoughts you're thinking about. That makes no sense. But if you ask me to, then I'll take a look at them and you can tell me what's going on. But so ultimately what I'm representing here is the degrees of attention. I can place the attention into the practice and into the world 100%. And I'm using this in an abstract way. There's no 100%, 0%. I'm just using it to kind of show a point that it could be 2 degrees. But then let's say I want to listen to somebody, or I want to ride a bicycle, or I want to do something that I've never done before. Now the degrees of my attention can oscillate. I can have, and this isn't necessarily aperture. Aperture has to do with, it is very similar, but also just the way I talk about it is just a little bit different. But so the degree of attention is relative to your practice and thinking and other types of cognition. And then, so does that make sense? before I go on? The degree of attention.
Yep.
Now,
Yes.
so now aperture of attention would be kind of using peripheral vision versus I'm going to really focus in on this R in the, I think that means that it's a registered trademark. Now, I do have a high degree of focus too, so they do tend to go hand in hand, that it is a focused degree of attention, but then also the aperture of my awareness is very focused. What we can learn to do, Lauren, is both. The aperture of awareness can actually become something that is what I call, it's kind of a part of that differential rotation, or things you can do both at the same time. So I can actually really have a closed aperture and then simultaneously sense in behind me. And now I'm doing both. That will actually create what I was talking about yesterday in the Warrior in the Garden Facebook Live, of creating the feeling of timelessness. That Facebook Live is actually I wouldn't say advanced, I don't want to use that word, but it is a technique that is really important to me personally. But I'd be interested to see, who actually tries it, who actually tries to hold the contextual opposites simultaneously. Now, I do want to focus on a couple things here real quick, just based on what was said. So, Jerry, the mind cannot entertain two thought streams simultaneously. I cannot think two thoughts at the same time. That's why when I'm thinking my thoughts, I cannot really hear your thoughts. We love to sometimes, like in conversations, we say, "Oh no, I'm listening." No, we're not. We're really not. We kind of, some of it is kind of coming in maybe, but to any real extent, we can't entertain both at the same time. Reading is a form of substitute dialogue, because when you read, it involves language, just like, and I think this is a great thing to mention because it's another form of substitute dialogue. So if I listen to Alan Watts, that is a form of substitute dialogue. What happens when a person reads? Aren't you saying those words in your mind to a certain extent as you're reading it on the paper? Right? That makes sense, right?
Yes.
So I think that's a great example of another form of substitute dialogue. So that can be an excellent technique if necessary. What I would say, though, is that it is almost impossible to listen to two voices at once. If you're reading, you are creating an internal voice of dialogue. It would be almost impossible to actually hear another stream of dialogue. We can't do both. We can't hear both. We can't say both in our minds. So, for example, Jerry, you know how I would, and I found myself doing it yesterday because I really wanted to listen to Shayna. No, Jerry, I'm not, this isn't personal. Do you see how I'm just kind of describing, when was the last time that I mentioned reading could be a form of substitute dialogue?
I don't recall.
Right. So
Yeah.
you just gave me an opportunity. It reminded me to mention this. It's not personal. Yeah, I get what you were doing in the moment. And if this was a one-on-one, then I would talk more about what recommendations I would make when we want to do that. So, but the thing I would highlight is that this is a principle. The human mind cannot entertain two multiple thought streams at the same time. This is why you cannot think and listen, and you cannot read and listen. I cannot listen to Alan Watts and listen to someone else at the same time. So that's a principle. One of the principles of the human mind. It's true for everybody. Your voice can have different personalities, but there's only one talking at a time. Just a side note. That's a principle that Jerry reminded me of. And then that's also, another aspect of the T practice is that reading can be a form of substitute dialogue, a valid one. I read all the time at the movie theater. I just, at a certain point, started to read the same books as opposed to reading new things and taking in a bunch of information. I wanted to learn from the information as opposed to accumulating it. Yes, Jerry.
I just was going to say, no, I wasn't taking it personally, but I guess I kept going back to it because it just happened. But
Okay.
sometimes you'll ask about our practice, And I just was going to share that that is what I was doing right then. I could tell that my thoughts were starting to get busy and then I wasn't listening to you. So I took a
Yeah,
redirect and just kind of went into some other words to slow that down and get back to class.
I see what you did. Now, would you like a recommendation?
Sure.
Okay. So what I would recommend in that situation is if I'm in, let's say I'm in my math class and I notice that my mind is veering off, that's not going to serve me, right, Jerry? I'm not going to be able to hear the math class if my mind veers off. True? I mean, or do
Yeah.
you agree? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
But let's say I have a book there and I start to read that book. Now, my mind is becoming more deliberate, I would agree, than it was just a moment ago because it was veering off. And because of your practice, you must have seen that. Otherwise, you would have just veered off and realized it 20 minutes down the road. But because you have cognitive attention on the present moment happening now as a result of the accumulation of your practice, you see it right away and you choose to redirect. I would say bravo. That is an example of a commitment to practice because you saw it as it was occurring. Now, what I wouldn't recommend doing is reading to go back to the present moment like that. What I would have done personally is I would have still used words because words help me redirect. That's what Jerry was doing. She was using words, and I get that. But personally, if it was me, I would use a mantra or talk to myself, the voice of power, which interestingly, that might be a good segue, Jerry, because that's the topic of this week, of the 13 weeks of basic alignment, is the voice of power. So what I would have done in that situation where I'm in a math class and the math teacher's talking and I do have a book in front of me, I notice that my mind is veering off. I don't want that to occur because I want to listen to the math teacher. But also reading the book will not aid me in the goal of listening to the math teacher. So I wouldn't view that as the, is it the worst trick of attention? Absolutely not. Veering off and not catching that would be far, that's not what we want. So you caught it. That's great. We did a trick of attention. I think that's great. But to sharpen that up a little bit, what I would recommend is a voice of power, which is still words that redirect you back to I would redirect back to the math teacher. I would remind myself using words that, oh, my mind was veering off. I'm going to go back to the math teacher because I need to pass this class. I want to do well. It's important to me. Do you see how now I'm starting to talk to myself? Not necessarily a mantra, but kind of a stream of thought that is redirecting me back to paying attention to the teacher and the goal. Do you see what I mean? So if I was in that situation, I would still use words because you're right. Words are a great way to redirect back to the present moment. But words in a book may not be as beneficial as using the voice of power to redirect you back to paying attention to what you want to pay attention to. Does that make sense, Jerry?
It absolutely does. The only thing I would add for your example, and I appreciate you sharing, would be on a personal level. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happened this morning. The information was becoming overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
I know this message. I could not be more interested in what I'm doing. But sometimes my mind, there's just a click of overwhelm. There's a lot to do here. Am I doing it? Started to go in a little bit of lack. There's so much to do. Did I get up this morning? Did I, pick my tricks? Did I set my rule of three? And then I'm listening to your voice and it was starting to get almost like the information was becoming toxic. And I don't mean it like that. But to me in that moment, it was almost like I had to really step back and get back right here. And that's not a negative. It's just sometimes, and we know it's lack. It's questioning. Can I do this? Will I do it? I love the message, but sometimes just in that moment, it got overwhelmed. Just personal.
All right, that makes sense. And then, so let's see, what was my other note? Okay, yeah. So the other note was, and this kind of goes along with what I'm talking about, like with listening to the math teacher, is to make sure that the tricks of attention that we're using are adaptive, that we have this tool or this pool or toolbox, I guess is another way that I would describe it, of points of attention that we can oscillate between. And then, so if I'm watching TV, Ida, I like to do defocus vision, or I'll look behind and I'll kind of see what's behind the director. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I wanted to ask you too about your feelings when you're watching a television program. How important are they when they're not really real? It's just been reflected from something that you're watching.
Oh, I don't know what you mean by not really real. Are you feeling
W-
something?
Yes,
No.
sometimes when I'm
So,
watching a drama, say there's a murder at the start of the show, and I do love things like this, but I don't like it to be too gory, but that's just a personal thing. But if I start getting feelings in my stomach area about, apprehension, or there's a bit of a predatory thing happening on in the show, how damaging is that to your practice? Is that something that I could avoid?
well,
Or is that when I would be using my tricks? Because I do my breathing and things, and say things like it's on television, it's just a show, stuff like that.
well, I mean, there's a few things to this. Um, I think the first thing,
This is too personal. Probably I should just leave that until
well, but it's also maybe some things that other people are experiencing as well. Yeah, it is a good question. So, but it is a question where we're starting to get into behavior. And the first thing I would say, though, the first thing that I can really just go straight towards is that how you feel is always real because you feel it. What are you feeling? You're feeling your own vibration, you're feeling your own emotion, you're feeling your own mood, you're feeling what you're creating. And how can you feel it? Your central nervous system, because your brain and your body are communicating chemically. So when you see something on the TV screen, your brain has a reaction that sends out signals, and then your body responds to that by sending out hormones. And then now your body is communicating with your mind, and now you're scared. And you see what I mean, Ida? All of that is real. All of what is occurring in your little bubble of perception is in air quotes real. Well, and that's actually interesting because that's what's happening when people are thinking about trauma, or they're thinking about something that creates an emotion. The emotion that they're creating is real. When they're thinking about the tiger in the room and they get that fight or flight response, the brain doesn't know. So in some ways, Ida, I'm not going to judge your behavior. And if we are going to talk about behavioral change, that is definitely a little bit more for a one-on-one session, because behavioral change in this practice is a result of attention itself, not force, not trying to control, not trying to manipulate. But when things don't feel good, I will respond to that with the direction of my attention, and that might be away from the TV. So definitely what I watch has changed, what I listen to has changed, but I don't judge it. I don't sit around and judge what I'm watching. I don't watch certain things that create certain feelings because I don't like them. I don't want them. And I'm not going to sit here and watch images on a TV screen that are changing my vibration, because that vibration is real. The way that I'm thinking is real. The way that I feel is real. My mind doesn't know that that monster doesn't exist. So my mind is responding with real fear, as if that, and if they can convince you that the monster is more real, then your mind responds, even more, and you're even more scared. That's why the director is getting it even more gory, because they want to have more realism, because with more realism, your brain will respond with what it might in that actual situation. Does that make sense, Ida?
Yes, it does now, and my behavior has changed around what I watch too, and I am careful about, I would choose, because I don't watch horror movies, or even things. I was watching something recently there, and I thought, why am I watching this? I just don't like the feeling of it. It was forensic psychology, and
Yeah. So now, oh, sorry.
okay, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, so now you are starting to get into, this is a stage of training where, when we're doing this practice, because of the cognitive attention training, we're noticing our behavior. and we're noticing how certain things make us feel. And there's definitely something that should be done in those situations. I would never ever. So this kind of alludes, but I'm not going to do anything that doesn't make me feel good unless it's, you know, chores or you know what I mean, something like that. Of course chores don't make me necessarily feel good, but I'm not having, I'm
It's
not
building
engaged.
power then, isn't it? If you're
What's
doing
that?
chores or something, that's building power, personal power, isn't it?
Just do
That's
energy.
a different
Just do
thing.
energy. It's a
Yes,
different
that
thing.
can
Yeah.
have a good feeling to it because you're accomplishing something.
Yeah.
But to sit around and to fill your mind with something that's going to make you. No, I never think about things after it's over. I'm not going to bed and worrying about it or anything like that. But I'm just wondering about those feelings that it creates at that particular time. How
So
damaging that is.
here's the principle. So I want to talk about this in principle, Ida, to avoid judgment, and then I'm going to go to Jerry's question. So exactly, Lauren, right? That mantra, a clean house makes me feel better. You're reminding yourself of how good you're going to feel when you're done cleaning the house, and that is a mantra that could be beneficial. That for me, that mantra involves psychological time. So I would say something different that just equals just do energy. Like it's just cleaning house. Like I'm going to be 110 and I have something to clean. So just do. You see what I mean? So my mantra may be a little bit different, but I could still see why that one would be beneficial. What was I saying, Ida? Oh, okay. So just in principle. So I maybe somebody just loves the artistic creation of creating horror movies. So I don't want to judge a person's preference because that's not what this is about. This is about how do you feel? And if you're watching something that does not make you feel good, I cannot understand why I would continue to entertain that because that feeling is real. I am creating an electrochemical, physical vibrational, energetic. Something is happening right now, and it is not in alignment. It doesn't feel good. It is not in alignment. It is feeling bad. So not just not well, but bad. So no, I would not recommend. I would recommend listening to the feeling, and the feeling is telling you that this isn't in alignment. So I'm not going to analyze it. I'm not going to judge it. This would be my voice of power. Let's say I start watching a television program and I'm not digging it. I can give you a specific example, Ida. And again, this is not judgment. I'm giving an example. In principle, a mind that is in alignment will go towards compassion, kindness, generosity, loving, compassion, in principle. So I'm not judging people's behaviors and what they prefer. But when I would play video games, I noticed that all my video games involved killing stuff. Right, Ida? Like I was playing a video game and I go kill 10 things and I come back.
Yes,
Or
but
I
then
go,
there's programs like Sherlock that have a little bit of tension with like suspects or murders or something that is
how does it make you
also
feel?
it,
That's the gauge.
yeah, I like that.
Mhm.
I like to watch a drama that has something like that in it, but I suppose wanting to identify the feeling of tension, maybe excitement, uh, as
I think you're
yeah,
thinking about it. I think you're
yeah.
thinking about it. Because
Yeah.
in principle, if it is exciting to you, if you're curious, if you're enjoying it, then in principle, it's in alignment. You see what I mean? At least right now. Maybe it won't be later. Maybe it is a part of your web, but we're not going to focus on trying to change ourselves, Ida. So if you like Sherlock Holmes, fucking watch Sherlock Holmes. I'm not going to judge you, and don't judge yourself. Right? Maybe 10 years down the road, you're like, you know what, that drama stuff, I'm not that into it anymore. And that's fine. Change with change rather than trying to force change, trying to manipulate change. This is not a practice of attempting to control. It's attempting to be present enough to identify how you feel, direct your cognition in a way to fill that space that you've created with what you see fit. So if you watch this program and it makes you feel shitty, don't watch it. And by don't watch it, I mean do something else. If you watch this program and it makes you feel good, watch it. until you don't want to anymore. But to sit there and analyze it, to sit there and compare and contrast, and should I and shouldn't I, and is this good? Is this sinful? Is this the right way? Is this the wrong way? All of that is just over analyzing, thinking, and attempting to manipulate and control. And it can be a very slippery slope, and it can happen a lot. So with my example with the video game, the video games are killing. Now, do I judge killing? Do I start to go into this, oh my God, thou shalt not kill, and we're all violent, we're always killing? No, I don't. I just don't like how that activity feels. So do I declare war on video games? No. Do I declare a war on violence necessarily? No, because all of that is a direction of my mind that I don't want it to go that way. That's not what I'm interested in. So instead, I changed the way I play the video game. Some of the video games that I play, I can create. I can build houses, and I can build communities, and I can just not fight. I don't have to kill stuff. I can do other things. There's games where I can craft, I can collect things, and I can use my imagination, and I can play. There's probably going to come a time where I don't want to play video games at all. I'm not interested. It's just not my thing. But sometimes what we do is we create the multiplicity of self. We declare a war on one aspect of that. We try to figure out another aspect of that. And before you know it, now we're thinking about what we should be thinking about and what we shouldn't be thinking about. We're thinking about what we should be watching and what we shouldn't be watching. We're thinking about what we should be eating and what we shouldn't be eating. We're thinking about how much we should be exercising, or whether we're not exercising. That's still comparing, contrasting, attempting to control, and turning our entire life experience into a running stream of internal self-talk that is essentially trying to analyze yourself and make yourself into something else. So there may come a time where my mind is less violent, but I was born into a violent society, and biologically, at one point, violence served me. So that's still a little bit inside of me. In my DNA, there's still a little bit of that in me. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'm
Yes,
not going
I
to,
do.
but Ida, here, let me make my point real quick. But I'm not going to try to change myself. I'm not going to try to vanish or vanquish or judge, or, my mind is the totality of my life experience, and that's what it is. And I'm not going to judge it. I'm not going to compare it. I'm not going to contrast it. I'm not going to try to change it. I'm not going to try to manipulate it. Instead, I'm going to determine the direction of my attention. And when I do that, all the energy flows that way. All of my creation flows that way. So as I change, as the world changes, I change. So let's take a habit, Ida. We're always talking about habits, and we want to change our habits, and we drink celery juice because we think it's going to make us more healthy. We do these things because we're trying to manipulate ourselves. We're trying to change ourselves. And I don't view that as totally necessary. There was a time where I went full vegan. That was forced, that was trying to control, that was attempting to manipulate. I used a shit ton of energy. Maybe it would have worked and I would still be vegan today, but it didn't. I hated it. It was going from one extreme to the other extreme, expecting the other extreme to be more beneficial, but maybe another person could. Maybe another person, they just instantly quit. It's like nothing. That's why we're all different. So that's why the practice will be different for every individual based on their individual battlegrounds. So maybe for another person, how they eat is not a battleground. They're just like, fuck it, I'm going to just eat vegetables and I'm okay with that. Yeah, fine. Meat, no problem. Dairy, no problem. You can have it all. I'm good. Well, that's not my mind. My mind is like, I fucking want milk and cookies. So that's my mind. So that's the mind that I have. That's the mind that I am arriving with, and I'm okay with that. I'm not going to judge that. I'm not going to attempt to control that. I can trust. The more that I direct my attention on purpose, the more that I am going to create how I want to feel. And then 20 years down the road, I'm probably not going to be doing that same behavior.
That's exactly what we started off talking about, which was the evening time when my practice slacks off. So the feelings that I'm getting from watching the program is the feelings that I'm getting because I'm not directing my attention, not using my tricks, allowing myself to be taken away by the television program, and not being fully present.
Fully present. We talked about that to degrees.
Yes,
you
to
just need to do the
degrees.
degrees.
Yes, well, I think that's what's happening there, is that allowing myself to coast at those particular times.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, if I was directing my attention, I could be using the voice of power. I could be using other senses and using other tricks to make the whole thing more enjoyable. rather than getting leaf at the mercy of the wind swept into the program and, you know, believing it or whatever it is that's happening there. It's because I'm not being aware,
Yeah,
possibly.
I mean,
That's
possibly.
actually my example. I'll just go ahead and do my deal. Is that an opening or not? Did I interrupt?
No, go ahead.
No, did I interrupt?
No, you
No,
didn't. I
no, you didn't. You're
go.
good.
I was just going to say that was what I wanted to share is as I was listening to Ida's example, I had the same experience last night, only in a very different way. And it was something that Ernest said, I don't know, months ago. He said it more than once, but I remember it was a few months ago. I don't know if we were talking about, oh God, what's that movie that his favorite one, Neo? I can't think of the name of it. Neo,
I-
what's the name of that
my-
movie?
My favorite movie is Phenomenon with John Travolta, but I do like the movie The Matrix.
Yeah, The Matrix.
Yeah.
It seemed like we were talking about movies.
Yeah.
And I remember listening, you know, sitting there in class listening, and you said, we were all talking about, you know, one of the fun things about movies is, you know, you get to be taken away with it. And I remembered that you know, made it very clear, I might be enjoying this movie, but I'm never out of my practice.
Right.
And in that moment, I thought, well, you know, it went a little sideways with me. I didn't question it or judge it. I just hadn't been doing it. And so I thought, wow, that seems to be kind of negating the point. But since I haven't tried it, you got to try it to know. So I started doing it. And the way, and I don't watch a lot of TV, but, you know, once in a while, it's like, hey, let's sit down and watch a movie. What I'm watching is very, very different now, making sure I'm not out of practice while I'm watching it. Because there is an intensity there and you can take it on easily. And that is part of the fun. So that's all I was going to share, was listening to Ida reminded me that when I tried what you were suggesting, it's just changed how I watch. Very, very much so.
Yeah. And I would say though, Jerry, the more that we play with the degrees of attention, the more that we can get really, really close to what the director and the artist is hoping to convey feeling, right? I'm not going to deny that artist, you know, they're hoping to elicit a feeling in us. And I think that that's great, you know, but when we use the word lost, we are the story. Our attention is no longer deliberate and we have just merged with the story itself. And I'm not okay with that personally, because in that space, I'm a leaf at the mercy of social conditioning. Does that make sense? That's a social conditioning moment for them if I'm unconscious, and I am not okay with
Yeah.
that. So at least to a degree, Ida, I will pay attention, like the basketball game. So I love college basketball. So I'm not gonna put all of my attention on the world around the TV, or I'm not gonna be able to connect it all to the basketball game and have fun. Does that make sense? But I'm also not going to lose myself in the game. Otherwise, I'm going to find myself jumping up, yelling at it like they can hear me. Do you see? This is the principle of balance, not the principle of one is right and one is wrong. This is the principle of adaptability, not you shouldn't watch scary movies. Thou shalt not eat this or that. No, 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 no. This practice is really void of belief for the most part. Yeah, to lose myself in watching. So do you know how I made the statement, Jerry, that deliberate attention has a feeling? And when we get to the event horizon, deliberate attention is preferred. I can't lose myself in watching something because I'm no longer deliberate, and that is not preferred.
Yeah, it just doesn't, you know, I'm not trying to belabor the point here, but Ida brought up something that I think we can all relate to, and that's watching a movie.
Yeah,
It's pretty easy to, I mean, the writers, the directors, my God, I mean, they can take us to places, you can just go right in there. And
yeah,
even if it's an exciting, you know, mystical kind of thing, it doesn't feel good anymore to go that far outside myself. I don't know. All I know is when you said it that day, I started practicing it as well. when I watched something, and it just changed how I watched. It has just changed. Not going back.
Maybe like this, Jerry, I want to dance with the director. I don't want the director to just like start whirling me around and I have no volition or will. You see what I mean? I want to dance with them.
Yeah, and when we're doing that, in order for us to go there, we got to be thinking. We're now bringing our cognition, our cup into the character, and then we start adding our stuff. And yes, I can understand that. But it just starts to get. I just choose not.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I do think that we may be getting close to a time where I start to talk about behavior, because the one thing that this practice is never doing is it's never confronting behavioral change, because that could be an exercise of force, and it could be trying to control. You could be trying to change something. You're arriving with the totality of the mind that you have created. You're just focusing on lack when you're pretending that that doesn't exist. So if you love horror movies and you've been watching them your whole life, to just deny them is another type of force and attempting to control. But indulging it is also not something that I would recommend. So we find the balance. And eventually your behavior will become modified. I no longer leave the towel on the bed, because when I would go to put it on the bed, I'm aware of my mind in the present moment because of my practice. And I know how it makes me feel when I forget something so simple as that. Let me make sure. Okay, yeah, it's not on the bed. I'm over here talking shit. I want to make sure it's not on the bed. Do you see what I mean? So the behavior will change. This does address behavioral change. It just does it without attempting to manipulate and control. And this is a perfect segue. So Ida, the number one thing that I would recommend in the evening is a voice of power, using your cognition rather than just thinking that somehow the words are going to be this or going to be that. And I'm going to think thoughts. They're just going to arrive that are always going to be creative, always going to be new. No, when we're in this transition from severe psychological suffering, which you're not, but we're in a transition from that to being able to direct our mind how we see fit. The architect, when we're in some sort of transition between that, which there's no real transition, it really is just a matter of attention from one to the other. But ultimately, Ida, the voice of power can become one of our most important techniques, one of the most important things we do. And the voice of power is really delivered in 3 ways. So the voice of power can be a mantra, right? Does anybody have a question on how you can, and so if you are talking to yourself for 90% of the day, I want you to talk to yourself for 92% of the day now. Just do it deliberately, do it on purpose. And I can promise that if you're doing it in a certain way, the way that T recommends, the overall cognition will begin to reduce over time. It will. But in the beginning, maybe you need to actually increase the amount of thinking, but deliberately. That is mantras. That is the voice of power. So the voice of power can be, I don't want to say conditioned, but it can kind of be nudged with mantras. Does that make sense? A mantra is a way.
Yes. It can be, yeah, and it depends what you say and how true it is for you. I mean, I personally don't say anything now that doesn't feel true for me. The mantra that I have been using this past couple of days, and I really like it, it really seems to work for me, is when my mind starts to go and I start chittering too much in my head, I say to myself, the chattering of my mind is becoming insignificant.
Mhm.
And it diminishes it then. And even though I know it's still happening, it's becoming insignificant. And I believe that it's becoming insignificant, that all thoughts, no matter what the thoughts are about, are just insignificant in the great scheme of things.
One reason I really like that is because it has a lot of ing. So it has a lot of present happening, as opposed to, in the future, I'm going to feel like wealthy
It's
or whatever.
becoming, because it's a doing thing now.
Mm-hmm. So Another way to activate the voice of power. I like the word activate because it's active and we're activating. So if we continue with the theme of watching movies or entertainment, which is also Ida, and I want to be careful that I don't talk about things that are too much out of order for today's topic. I'm kind of dancing around that a little bit, but when we start to talk about substitute dialogue, when we start to talk about behavioral change and things like that, we are starting to talk about things that are a little bit down the road with this practice, because we don't talk about those things really right away, because the mind is just going to attempt to control. But Ida, this next sentence is probably going to ring true. The only reason that the mind creates the multiplicity of self is to declare war on aspects of that multiplicity. And by declare war, I mean try to change, try to manipulate, try to control that aspect. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Does that ring true?
Control. Yep.
It's a form of control. Yeah. The multiplicity of self. So now I've divided myself up into all of these elements, and I'm like, ooh, you watch horror movies and you eat pork? Oh, no. This has got to change, Ernest. This is bad. That cognition is so popular, and you're also interacting with the fourth destroyer of entertainment. And there's a reason I call it a destroyer. Do not try to confront the destroyers directly. You feed them. You feed the destroyers when you confront them directly. That's madness. So if one of the destroyers is entertainment, I am not going to, or behavioral change is really, I'm not going to confront behavioral change directly. That will only feed it. And if I am actually able to change a behavior using force, I just used a shit ton of energy to do it. And I need that energy to live so that I can live to 110. Can't go around throwing my energy all over the place. Otherwise, I'm not going to make it that far. I only have so much candle wax in the candle. Does that make sense, Ida? Does that ring true? So I'm going to go back.
Trying to change, trying to control.
Yep. Uh-huh.
Yeah. But you just get away from things that you no longer like, that things that are no longer any use to you without trying. I used to be, I could sit down at night and drink a bottle of wine, but I can't anymore. I don't want to. I have changed that, 2 glasses is sort of my maximum now. Where before I would have laughed at that and said, what sort of a party animal are you? You can't even drink a bottle of wine anymore. But now I just I know that it's not going to feel good tomorrow, and there's no force involved with it. I can just stop it quite easily, and it's a great feeling.
The great feeling, yeah, personal power. So Jerry, which one am I going to add here? We just talked about it today. Substitute talk, because sometimes I don't spell the word dialogue correctly, just being honest. So we got our mantra, we got substitute dialogue. What did I just add today that's almost just like substitute talk?
Substitute words.
Yeah, substitute reading.
Reading, yeah.
That can also be a voice of power, because maybe you have it written down on your note card. So that's your reminder. You're using your note card that is activating your voice of power. Does that make sense? So I'm outlining the voice of power. So all of these situations, Ida, I'm not saying you have, but you have created the multiplicity of self. And what we do when we create the multiplicity of self is we declare war on aspects of that multiplicity of self. You can use the voice of power when this is occurring to remind yourself of your practice, what's happening, and you can even use your voice of power with the 3 pillars. I am present. I can be mindful in this moment. There's nothing that requires judgment. I am present. I am mindful. And my breath is my trick of attention. My breath is my point of deliberate focus and attention in the moment. Do you see, I just used the 3 pillars and I just talked myself through it. That is the voice of power. That is conditioning I don't prefer conditioning, sorry. activating the voice of power. Substitute dialogue and substitute reading can work. Do those make sense so far?
Yes, that's very helpful. It's just reminding me to do something in the evenings, do something more in the evenings without attempting to control, but to stay awake, really.
Mm-hmm. I know what you mean. Although woke and wake, got to be careful not to confuse those words with your alarm clock went off and now you're awake. But I get you. So which ones do we have so far? We have a mantra. Any questions about using a mantra as substitute dialogue, or do we get it? Or excuse me, a mantra as activating the voice of power. Using your cognition functionally is the voice of power. Eventually, it will just do that on its own, but I'm getting to that. And then the second one that we could use is substitute dialogue. And that could be listening to Alan Watts or listening to anything really that you find inspiring. You could also read something that you find inspiring, and that's substitute reading. Do all those make sense so far? I'm going to add a couple that you may find very beneficial, but that maybe I haven't talked about as much. But 4, I'm going to do as, I guess 4 and 5 could be in almost any order, but sub principle. And there's a reason I put this one first. But so you can substitute what would ordinarily be your self-talk, reminding yourself of principle, of what you view principle. So let's say Jerry, I don't know, I don't want to use the same people. I won't use anybody, I'll just tell you. So let's say I'm going to use the substitute of principle with how I feel. Let's say I feel sad. Well, I'm going to remind myself of transience and the principle of motion. My sadness is always changing. Feeling sad now does not mean I'm going to feel sad later. I just need to go back to my practice. So you see what I did? And this is the important point, that whatever we're doing will point back to the practice, not to manipulation, not to trying to control, not trying to eliminate one of the selves that you've created in the multiplicity of self, but it's just the raw point of attention. Where is my mind and did I put it there? I want my whatever I'm doing with the voice of power to point back to that. The voice of power will always point back to present moment awareness, attention, and interacting with your experience. So we have a mantra that can point back to the present moment. We have substitute dialogue that could be Mr. Alan Watts, or it could be Buddha, it could be Dalai Lama. Maybe Mike has a recording on YouTube that I can listen to. Substitute dialogue. You could read one of my books. You can read anybody's books. You can read the newspaper. It doesn't matter. You could read the phone book. Substitute reading could be another opportunity to interrupt what otherwise would be habitual, repetitive talk in your mind that's not serving you, such as, oh, I need to change this aspect of myself, or I need to change this behavior. A lot of, without picking on individual things, there's stuff in the world today that wants to create this version of perfection just to show you how much you're not it. Just to show you how much you are not this version of perfection, so that you're constantly focusing on lack, so that you're constantly leaking power. That is a great subject for what I call modern metaphysical enslavement, keeping you down by having you focus on lack. Damn. So substitute reading, substitute principle. Now, when I talk about substitute principle, I will substitute what would otherwise be repetitive habitual cognition with a principle. I'm going to tell myself that sadness is changing. I don't have to focus on it or worry about it, or let's say I'm looking at the piece of cake and I still feel, that I want to go back into unconsciousness, and I'm like, that's okay. This is changing. Behavior is always changing the direction I want it to change, as long as my mind is going the direction I want it to go. Mind go first, body, action, behavior go with it. That's my theory. not trying to change our actions first. That makes no sense, because then the mind that created the actions is going to recreate that in some way. If you don't change the mind, you're not really changing anything. So the other one would be, so does substitute principle make sense? I added that one. Now, eventually what starts to happen is the voice of power starts to take on a different complexion. So I'll just kind of skip to that because we're at 8:14. So the voice of power starts out you talking to yourself in a productive way. But then the voice of power, and this has always been there, and I know you've heard it before, but now the voice of power will start to basically speak about the present moment. It will basically call out what is happening, as opposed to you using words to redirect. So the voice of power kind of has two different modalities. One, you are activating it, and one, it is active. The active voice of power, you're about to get that third piece of cake, and then the voice of power just reminds you, you don't even want it. This isn't, you don't even, this is fine. You don't need the cake. And you're like, oh yeah, that's true. And then you don't eat it. You see what I mean? The voice of power came in to tell you what's what, to remind you of you're not even hungry, homie. Like, what are you doing? You don't need to do that. And then you tell yourself, oh yeah, I can have cake later. Like, I'm not declaring war on cake. I will have cake again. It's fine. I don't even really want it right now. And now you're starting to follow the feeling, which can lead to the behavioral change. And it's not multiplicity of self. It's just you're constantly evolving and moving and changing and creating a new spider's web without declaring war on the old one. Does that make sense? Any questions about how you can start to now? You could do this a lot. Seriously, in the beginning, this could be done especially in battlegrounds. Holy cow. And this could be a part of your rule of three, of course, as well. So the idea is that when we're entering a battleground, you can remind yourself, Ida, when you're going into the evening, you can remind yourself, hey, I don't have to manipulate. I don't have to try to control. I only need to maintain attention to a degree. Everything will change on its own as long as I'm just doing my practice. Now, one thing that I would recommend, Ida, talking to yourself about, I would recommend activating the voice of, it's almost compassion towards yourself, but it is the voice of allowing. You are not allowing when you're trying to control your own personality or your own multiplicity of self. If you're judging yourself because you drank a third cup of coffee or a third glass of wine, or you looked at the boobs, if you are judging yourself, you're leaking power. If you're trying to change yourself, you're focusing on lack and you are leaking power. And you're actually just creating more of what you don't want, the multiplicity of self. You're creating more division the more that a person does that. And then before you know it, they're sinful creatures who will never, you're just born to die because of the sins of the ancient man. And now it's like, oh my God, what is going on? What have we done? Does that make sense? So we can use our own internal dialogue as a trick of attention. And you can do it a lot if necessary, because that is purposeful thought. It is functional thought. And I'm not going to tell you what to believe, because I'm not trying to program. I'm not going to tell you to think positive necessarily. But I gave the principle, or the example of using the voice of principle, where I remind myself of the principles that are going on. And I can remind myself that this is always changing. I can do that. So I can use my own words to point back to the practice. And that is starting to activate your voice of power. But the voice of power starts to take on a different complexion the more that we do this practice. Before you know it, the voice of power is reminding you. Now, what is happening? What is occurring? With the lack of resistance, when we're not resisting the present moment and we're engaging it, we are actually accessing infinite intelligence. We're accessing the nature of infinity. And that could look like an aha moment. that could look like a really good idea, that could look like a solution-based thought, or if there's no thinking involved, it looks like flow. It looks like you just ran into the building and you saved the baby, or you just ran into the emergency, you had the perfect idea, you executed it, and you saved everybody. Just as some wild examples. So you can, the two complexions of the voice of power. Number one, you start to activate it by talking to yourself in a way that you see fit. A mantra: everything is changing. I don't have to cling and control. You know, I don't have to declare war on my behaviors. I don't have to try to change myself, because that is, again, just another cognitive trap. I am always changing. And the more that I direct my attention, the more that I'm creating consciously, the more that everything will be exactly where I put it. But on purpose this time, not accidentally, because everything is always where you put it. And then the voice of power is getting very creative. And then all of a sudden, the voice of power is an aha. It's a beautiful thought. It's a beautiful feeling. Does that make sense? So the voice of power is that connection to infinity. And eventually it is a wildly creative voice, and it's amazing. And it's obviously something that can be very beneficial, but it does not coincide with the repetitive habitual voice of dysfunctional cognition. The reason that that voice has accumulated is because we've been taught that. And the reason that we've been taught that is because at some point in human history, human beings stopped paying attention to the world around them in favor of their own thought. They started thinking way too much. That's very likely because there was no longer the everyday threat of safety. So we just started thinking all the time. And then that thinking mind declared war on the minds that weren't doing that. The minds that were more balanced were all of a sudden primitive, and they eradicated them. And, you know, I'm not a historian, so that is not my lane. But I do know that here we are. We live in a society where the mind and the thinking is not the voice of power. It is the voice of leaking power, the voice of giving over our power. Does that make sense? And the voice of power can be something that we do early in the practice, reminding yourself that, you know, I am good enough. I can do this. Things will work out for me. I will always have challenges, and I will adapt. I will learn. I can always feel peace and contentment, even with the desire to create. Contentment is not stagnicity. Contentment is not trying to change, going with rather than against. Peace. Peace doesn't mean that you're accepting an untenable situation. Peace just means that you're in the process of change without trying to control and deny and manipulate. Does that make sense? The voice of power. So that would be in our 13 topics of T. I do believe that is number 12, the voice of power. And we are almost done with basic alignment. So this would be some of the most important topics that I think are absolutely necessary to building a solid T practice or mind space practice, whatever we're talking about. Okay, so we talked about sub-readings. Reading can be a form of substitute dialogue. Reminding yourself of principle can be a good form of substitute dialogue. Any questions about any of that? Any questions about how that fits into your practice? So in the beginning, are we talking to ourselves a lot? Not at all? What do you think?
I'll be creating a drama around remembering all the principles. Remembering the principles, because you're talking about principles there, and I'm thinking, how would I know if that was a principle or not? I should know this. Should.
Yeah, that's a slope for you, Ida. But also what I'm recommending is that the principle will be relative to the moment. So sometimes that principle will come to you. A lot of this is the voice of power is it comes to you. We're going to help create the conditions for that to occur, which is mind space, creating space in the mind using functional cognition. What are we creating space in? Repetitive habitual thoughts that don't serve you. There's got to be principles that you know, Ida, that you are convinced of, even if you're talking about them in your way. You
The
know, the
golden
principle.
mean principle.
How about those first four that we work with? The principle of balance, the principle of attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shana, you were getting a phone call, but you're not supposed to be at work, are you? No. We're almost finished here, so I'll give it back. All right, any questions, comments, or concerns about any of this? And of course, I'll keep talking about the voice of power because it's an essential component to really realignment, learning to align yourself to the present moment so that you can learn to adapt without attempting to manipulate, control with thinking, with just thought. Yes, Sonia, any questions? Oh, I saw you demute, sorry. I can see that on the screen. Otherwise, that's all I plan to talk about today was just topic number 12, and then next week we'll talk about topic number 13, and then that will be the very beginning of if somebody wanted to start a T practice, we have those 13 points. We learn about attention, we learn about the nature of attention, we learn about what we can do with our voice, with our words, rather than just hoping that things change. We can be a little bit more deliberate with our cognition. And especially in your battlegrounds, you know, talk to yourself in a more productive way. It's not necessarily the power of positive thinking though, because the things that were most productive just pointed back to the present moment for me. It didn't have to be in air quotes positive. I just needed to be present. There was a certain point where I knew that. I didn't have to romanticize.
Does the voice of power feel like a nudge in the beginning? Like a little nudge?
What
Yeah.
do you mean? I don't know.
Well, when I'm hearing, you know, about having that third glass of wine, there's a tiny sort of feeling like a nudge. That said, the voice says to me, you know, how are you going to feel tomorrow? You mightn't, you know, from the past, you've learned that this isn't good for you, that kind of thing. But it feels a bit like a nudge, like you're being nudged in a certain direction. The voice of power.
Maybe.
Yes or no? Well, it does to me.
It does to you.
Yeah.
That's the good answer. Yeah, it might feel like a poke, it might feel like a nudge. For me, it feels like a reminder. That's why, you know, I would use that. But to be clear, the voice of power is words. So the words do have a feeling sometimes. So look at that feeling. Does the feeling look like it's trying to nudge you in a different direction? Then maybe it is. And I want to mention, though, the only time that the voice of power asks questions is if it's rhetorical. It is the voice of infinite intelligence. It's not asking you questions. So if you're sitting here asking yourself all these questions, that's not the voice of power. Yeah, but Ida's question was rhetorical. How are you going to feel tomorrow? She already knows she's going to feel shitty. That was a rhetorical question. So I really like it when the voice of power asks rhetorical questions, because it's basically just reminding you in question form of why you don't really want to do this. But the reason you are doing it is repetitive, conditioned, habitual behavior. And that's okay. I still have some repetitive habitual behavior, and I'm not declaring war on it. I'm not trying to become an icon of perfection. I arrive with the mind that I have. I arrive the totality of who I am. There's so many times where people talk shit and it is contradictory, you know, arrive with the body that you have today. You are perfect. Now let's try to change you. It's like, what? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So we're saying one thing and then we're doing diametrically the opposite.
Yeah,
So
I get that.
yes, Jen.
I was just going to mention I had a situation. I've had a feeling of anxiety on Sunday. I had a lot of things that I wanted to do before a particular time, and I was feeling that rush energy on my walk with the dogs, and it was kind of like Ida mentioned. It was like a poke, a reminder, like, hey, I was feeling that energy, and I was feeling like a constriction in my throat with my breath as I was feeling that. And as I was feeling that, I felt myself go to maybe trying to control my breath and making adjustments to my posture at the same time. And then there was this nudge, like Ida said, that said, you know, how successful has that been for you in the past? By trying to adjust your breathing and adjust your posture, it doesn't make it feel any better. It actually makes it feel worse. So what I did is I pointed back to my practice. I went into a mantra, with taking the focus away from it altogether. And then I focused outside of myself on trees and things outside of myself. And by the end of the walk, that anxiety was gone. So yeah, like you kind of get that, you see yourself trying to go back to your old patterns of behavior. And then there's like a tap on the shoulder, like, hey, that's not going to help you. It's just more of the same, and you're just going to feed it more and put more attention on it and cause more pain. So yeah, that's just an example I had on Sunday with the voice of power.
Yeah, what I like about that example is it uses both the arrival and the activation. So it arrived. She started to manipulate and control, and then the voice of power arrived as words. At first, it arrived as a feeling because she was connected, but it was translated as words because that's the minds we have arrived with. We like to translate stuff into words and talk to ourselves. It's fine. Will the enlightened future society, air quotes, future society, be doing this? Probably not, but here we are. So not there yet, folks. So the rhetorical question that occurred in her mind, did you notice how rhetorical that was? It wasn't a real question. It was, how does this make you feel when you do this? You feel shittier, your body gets more sore and you start to create tension in other areas. It wasn't a real question. It was a rhetorical question so that she could point back to her practice. That arrived. That was because she was creating space, because she was very likely also doing her practice in that moment. So we create space and we connect. That's the principle. When we connect, the energy flows between infinity and what we view as finite. It's really just infinity flowing with infinity, but just for the sake of discussion, infinity and finite are connected. The energy's flowing between. Now we can be creative, we can have great ideas, we can be compassionate, we can be caring, we can be kind, all without trying, because the energy is flowing. And sometimes that flow of energy gets translated as words. And that was the voice of power. And then Shayna used the voice of power. It arrived, and then she used a mantra. So she did a combination of both. That is excellent practice. And moreover, she used the voice of power that arrived, and then she created the voice of power that was more of the mantra. And all of that, I'm hoping or assuming, was pointing back to the present moment and the practice at hand.
And my mantra was very simple. It was just a simple, here I am, but I made sure to not just think about it in my mind. I kind of like verbally used my lips as emotion as well to verbalize it as I was walking, like, just to really feel the mantra myself. And so it did take attention away from the focus on trying to control the situation.
I find that helps, Shayna, if you say your mantra, if you can, if you're on your own. This morning when I was in the car, I was able to say my mantra aloud, and that helps as well.
Yeah, because it, like, just hearing it and like, because you're putting attention there. So I needed something a little stronger than just thinking about the mantra. I needed something, because it really was, my throat was starting to like constrict on me, like I wasn't getting full air. So it was like over something simple too. It's like, I got stuff to do. It's not that big of a deal, but you just feel that rush energy. But yeah, when I had needed something to really grab my attention, to take the focus away from trying to control and manipulate the situation.
I would also point out that that is multiple points of attention, because to talk it, that's action. So you think it, and then you talk it, And now you're also listening to it. So if it is appropriate, I think that's an excellent practice point, Ida and Shayna, is yeah, say it out loud if you can. I did that all the time if I was by myself. Sometimes if people were there, I would get up and I would just say it out loud. I'm like, I'm not going to entertain this right now. Like, this is just a bunch of bullshit and it doesn't serve me. Peace, performance, fleece, and hair grease. I'm out.
Right. If it makes you feel better, yeah, who cares? Is there like it's all I want to just feel better. If they think I'm crazy, they think I'm crazy. Oh well.
Yeah. Oh, well, I agree. Voice of power would come in and say, at the end of the day, when you're transitioning to something new, almost at a new experience, when you're transitioning to something new, that shit ain't gonna matter. You're not gonna be thinking about what Charlie was thinking about when the 13th day of January in 2020. We're not gonna be thinking about that shit. It doesn't matter. The only reason it matters now is because the light of our attention is on it. It's so simple. These principles are so simple. Life is not difficult. We have just made it exceedingly difficult because as a species, we stopped doing what we were born doing, what we have been doing since humans were something else. We stopped engaging the present moment. We stopped paying attention to the present moment on purpose. And the human mind started to think all of the time. And that gross disproportional imbalance over generations has equaled a species that is actually on the cusp of extinction, and they don't even know it. And I'm not going to highlight that and talk about that and focus on that. It just is what it is. And I'm okay with whatever it is because I got to be. It's about my mind, what I'm doing with it. If I really want global, worldwide species change, that starts with my mind and then works outwardly from there. So the order of operations for me is always clear. Where is my mind and did I put it there? If I can't answer that, I'm not really in a position to be in service to anybody. All right, cool. So we'll talk about this more throughout the week because this is also the title of my book, The Voice of Power. In this book, one of the things, and so I'll make this recommendation. This is your practice point for the day. So we have this thing that we call the voice of power, and we're using our mantra and we're talking to ourselves. Talk out your rule of three. Or excuse me, not your rule of three. Talk out your 3 pillars, Ida. So if you get the opportunity, or anybody who's practicing this, talk to yourselves. I am present. In this moment, I am mindful. I am not labeling, judging, comparing, contrasting. I am talking and I am thinking, but I am not attempting to control the moment. I am present. I am mindful. And in this moment, talk out your trick of attention. Say it out loud if you can. In this moment, I am choosing to pay attention to the geometry of the room. I have rectangles, I have squares, I have circles. I am present, I am mindful, and I can see the geometry of the room. Now I'm adding another point of attention, the movement and the breath. That's an amazing rule of 3, and that can help you redirect, not avoid, not suppress, not pretend things aren't occurring, but we redirect back to the present moment so that we can adapt, so that we can move to change. And that is called alignment. That is called going with the present moment rather than against it. And if we're present, we're mindful, and we're intending the direction of our attention, we become the architect. Because before you know it, after doing this for so long, everything is exactly where you put it intentionally, not accidentally. So try that today if you feel inspired. Use your voice of power as a part of your practice. I'm assuming everybody has set up their day. Mike, I'm assuming that you woke up and you immediately established your point of attention. I'm assuming, and I'm just assuming, not assuming, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do, but I'm assuming that you have set up your tricks of attention. You have identified your battlegrounds. You have segmented because you know where you're going to potentially be coasting. You have mantras on one side of your note card and you have tricks of attention on the other side of the note card. You have a voice of power that is active and ready to direct back to the practice and back to the present moment, back to where my life experience and everyone's life experience is actually happening. I call it the point of actualization, the point of present moment. In this moment, I'm going to pay attention to the feeling of my own body in space and time. I can feel that. I am present. That is the voice of power. And in that space, you may be surprised how many good ideas you have. You may be surprised how many ahas, because all of a sudden you can see the moment. When you can see the moment, you can add to your info and knowledge relationship, or experience, excuse me. Information plus experience equal knowledge. Not if you're not paying attention to your experience, you'll never add to that component. You'll be missing the experience component because you're focusing too much on the information. That's imbalance. We need them both if we want knowledge that is transferable. Wisdom is not transferable. Wisdom is the expression of knowledge. I can transfer information. I can even give you a little bit of my experience. I can talk about it, but that's still information. Once you have your own experience to compare to the information, you now have knowledge that you can share with another person. And then they have the opportunity to express that knowledge. If I express knowledge, that is wisdom. If I know that 3 cups of coffees make me feel shitty and I drink 4, that is not very wise, is it? I already know, though, that I only need 2, that I feel good after 2 cups. Do you see what I mean? So if I am aware, present, paying attention to how I feel, and I'm grabbing that 3rd cup and I'm like, oh no, wait a second, I don't even really want this. Okay, voice of power, I'm just going to go ahead and put it back and keep going with my day. I'm fine. I'm good with the 2 cups. Present, mindful, you just interacted with the behavior. You did it without attempting to control. You just paid attention to how you felt. All of these principles are in play. And in this moment, I am choosing to feel peace. I feel it. I'm emphasizing it. That's also a big part of mind space. Create the mind space. You can use the voice of power. I feel the mind space when I do it. It's right there. When I do the practice, I feel it. When I take a breath, I feel it. When I listen to the music, when I listen to the space between the words, gave a little extra space there, I feel it. Do you see what I mean? So you can focus on the feeling as well. And that's getting a little bit into what I call the mind space training. Mind space training focuses on the rule of 3 and redirecting what is unproductive. Creating mind space and then filling it with what you see fit. That's all I got. Any questions, comments, or concerns before we head out of here? I did put up a post where we're not going to have classes next week because Shayna and I are doing some stuff and some things. So we'll be a little bit busy. Otherwise, the book is coming soon. You're going to see the mindfulness mentoring. I'm going to start to create a page and kind of advertise the mindfulness mentoring a little bit, the mind space mentoring. Otherwise, you're going to see some courses coming soon because that's what I'm creating in my spare time. In my working time, I'm creating course content. So finally, we're going to have a complete course that somebody can sign up and they can learn all of this. And I'm actually creating a daily practice. And it's a course. It starts out, it's just 30 days, but you would do the course every single day for 30 days. And it's basically me taking a person along with a 30-day deliberate mindfulness practice. First, I explain it, and then we do it. And then if a person wants to, they can continue to take 30-day increments of course training. Oh, Ada, me too. I feel blessed that you were there from the beginning. Because you get to see its maturation. You get to see the evolution of a system, I guess system is one way of looking at it, but I'm drawing a blank on the word, a tradition perhaps of mindfulness, embodying mindfulness, but it's not, it's a different kind of embodiment because it's not trying to change and control. So Ida, if this was a one-on-one, I would encourage you to activate the voice of allowing. So I would encourage you to, and the voice of allowing would remind you that you're not trying to control, that everything is changing anyway, that you don't have to create this multiplicity and declare war on aspects. So the voice of allowing became so important to me because the mind is trying to control. It's always trying to control because it's relating shit to safety that isn't really related to safety. It's viewing this as creating unsafe when actually there is no tiger in the room, as far as I can tell. So it's creating those feedback loops and it's not really occurring. but the feedback is occurring, the emotion is occurring. We talked about that at the beginning of the class. So yeah. All right, so I guess that's all. I made some announcements. Yeah, so next week, and then today at 12:30, I'm going to do the Warrior in the Garden Facebook Live. I'm going to talk about the equation, and if you guys get time to watch that, great. Otherwise, I'm just hoping to give that group a little bit of some content, just sharing. All right, that's all I got. Well, if you are interested in a one-on-one, that is mindspacementor.com. And I think that it's a very reasonable price for about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. It just depends on if we're getting too chatty and it just doesn't seem like it's focused, I'll keep it 45 minutes. But if we're really going somewhere with some direction on your practice and what we should be doing, I'll go way over time. I don't care. But yeah. All
Thank you.
right.
Thanks,
Yes, you're
everyone.
welcome,
Thank
Ida.
you.
Of course.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah,
See
thank
y'all
you so
later.
much. Appreciate you guys being here. Next week, we finish basic alignment. That's exciting. And then we go into counterbalance, the 13 points of counterbalance, and then the 13 points of warrior training, and then the 13 points of seer training. And then that will be the 52 points of T, the complete practice. And Mindspace Mentoring and Mindspace Academy, it does use the T practice. It just, the entry point for Mindspace does involve cognitive redirection therapy. Redirecting the mind back to the present moment is cognitive redirection therapy. All right, well, thank you guys. I will see you again soon. I really appreciate you being here. If you have questions, comments, concerns, you can always send me messages. You can send me emails, whatever you want. Give me a call. Otherwise, I will see you guys again at 12:30 for the Facebook Live. And then we have a class tomorrow, which is movement, basic movement, nothing fancy, just follow along. We'll do some syncing the chi and some stuff like that, but that'll be Wednesday. All right, I will see you guys then. Thanks for hanging out. Bye,
Bye.
guys.